Attention! Today, we take you through one of the most impactful events recorded in the United States during the war. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you are watching from and the exact time at which you are listening to this narration. We are interested in knowing to which places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The morning fog hung heavy over Hampton Roads, Virginia, March 7th, 1862. Lieutenant Catesby AP Roger Jones stood on the deck of what many derisively called a floating coffee pot. The Confederate ironclad CSS Virginia, converted from the salvaged hull of the USS Merrimack, prepared to challenge conventional naval warfare doctrine. That morning, no one could have predicted how quickly established naval superiority would collapse. Captain Franklin Buchanan had received his orders directly from Secretary of the Confederate Navy, Stephen Mallory. The correspondence, later preserved in the Naval War Records Office, contained a simple directive: test the effectiveness of our ironclad design against the wooden vessels of the Union blockade. According to logbooks recovered from the Norfolk Navy Yard, supplies for the Virginia were loaded throughout the night of March 6th. Coal, ammunition, provisions, all carefully documented by Quartermaster William Robinson. Yet Robinson's personal journal, discovered in 1941 in a trunk belonging to his grandson, contained an entry that contradicted the official manifest. Captain requests additional powder charges. Claims official allotment insufficient. Request denied by Yard Commander. Captain insistent something about making history tomorrow. The USS Cumberland's deck log, recovered after the battle, noted unusual activity around Sewell's Point during the early morning hours. Lieutenant George Morris, the ship's executive officer, ordered increased vigilance, but dismissed reports from lookouts about strange smoke as nothing more than nervous imaginations. Morris would later explain his reasoning to the Naval Court of Inquiry. We had received reports of Confederate naval movements for weeks, with nothing materializing. The men were tired of false alarms. As dawn broke, the CSS Virginia moved slowly through the Elizabeth River toward Hampton Roads. Engineer Charles Ramsey noted in his technical log that the engine struggled under the massive weight of the iron casemate. His hourly readings showed increasing boiler pressure but declining speed. The last entry before engagement simply stated, "Engine straining. Chief engineer concerned about ability to maneuver during combat. Captain unconcerned." When the Virginia finally emerged from the river channel, observers on shore reportedly fell silent. The reaction aboard the USS Cumberland was different. Master's mate Charles Haywood would later claim in correspondence to his brother that laughter erupted among the crew. "It looked like a barn roof atop a hull," he wrote. The letter, dated March 8, 1862, was discovered in 1890 among family papers donated to the Massachusetts Historical Society. Captain Buchanan reportedly observed the Union fleet through his spyglass without comment. The officer of the deck, Lieutenant Robert Minor, recorded in his journal that the captain merely nodded and said, "Signal full steam ahead." That journal entry would remain sealed in Confederate naval records until 1895. At approximately 8:45 in the morning, the USS Cumberland's signal officer hoisted flags indicating an unknown vessel approaching. According to the signal log, no response came from the flagship USS Minnesota. A second, more urgent signal followed 15 minutes later. The response from Minnesota, as recorded by signalman Thomas Wilson, simply read, "Maintain position. Vessel believed experimental. No cause for alarm." By 9:15, the Virginia had closed to within half a mile of the Cumberland. What happened next would change naval warfare forever. Lieutenant Jones, who would later command the Virginia after Buchanan's wounding, described the moments before engagement in a report filed with the Confederate Navy Department. The enemy vessels maintained position, seemingly unconcerned by our approach. Captain Buchanan ordered the forward gun crews to prepare, but held fire until we were at point-blank range. The Virginia's guns opened fire at 9:22. The shot struck the Cumberland's bow, causing minimal damage. According to gunner Samuel Milliken's report, the Cumberland returned fire immediately. "Our broadside struck the Ironclad with tremendous force," wrote Milliken, "yet produced no visible effect. For 7 minutes, the Cumberland poured fire into the approaching Virginia. Recovered shell fragments from the harbor bed in a 1938 dredging operation showed deformation consistent with impacts against iron plating. Analysis by naval ordnance specialists confirmed that the shells had flattened rather than penetrated. At 9:30, the Virginia rammed the Cumberland. Lieutenant Jones's report described it clinically. "Our ram struck below the waterline. Upon withdrawing, water rushed into enemy vessel." What Jones omitted was recorded by Virginia crewman Marcus Milligan in a letter to his wife. "A terrible sound of twisting metal and breaking timbers. Men screaming." The Cumberland began to list immediately. The Cumberland sank within minutes, her guns firing until they were underwater. Of her crew of 376, 121 were lost. The Virginia, barely damaged, turned toward the USS Congress. What happened over the next hour transformed naval thinking across the world. Lieutenant Austin Pendergrast, the surviving senior officer of the Congress, testified before the Naval Court of Inquiry that his vessel fired continuously at the Ironclad without effect. According to gunnery logs, the Congress expended 173 rounds against the Virginia. Post-battle inspection of the Ironclad revealed only superficial damage. By 10:45, the Congress had struck her colors. The Virginia, unable to take the surrendered vessel as a prize due to Union shore batteries, fired hot shot into the Congress, setting her ablaze. She would burn until her magazine exploded at midnight. A curious gap exists in the official timeline between 1100 hours and 1400 hours. The Virginia's log, maintained by ship's clerk John O'Keefe, contains no entries during this period. When recordings resumed, the Ironclad was already engaged with the USS Minnesota, which had run aground while moving to assist the Cumberland and Congress. Engineer Ramsey's technical log notes reduced maneuverability due to damaged smokestack and difficulty maintaining steam pressure. Yet the attack continued. The Minnesota suffered significant damage but remained afloat when the Virginia withdrew due to the falling tide. As darkness fell on March 7th, a message was telegraphed from Norfolk to Richmond. The text, preserved in the Confederate communications log, read simply, "Engaged enemy fleet. 2 vessels destroyed, others damaged. Virginia returning for repairs. Minimal damage sustained." In Washington, the reaction was panic. Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles summoned his advisors to an emergency meeting. According to Assistant Secretary Gustavus Fox's diary, Welles appeared ashen as reports arrived. "What if it comes to Washington?" President Lincoln allegedly asked. The question, recorded by Fox, revealed the vulnerability felt by Union leadership. By midnight, orders had been sent to the USS Monitor, the Union's own experimental ironclad, to proceed immediately to Hampton Roads. Captain John Warden acknowledged receipt at 12:47. His response, recorded in naval communications logs, was terse. "Proceeding as ordered. Will engage enemy vessel if encountered." The Monitor had been designed by Swedish engineer John Ericsson specifically to counter the threat of Confederate ironclads. Unlike the Virginia's sloped casemate design, the Monitor featured a revolving turret housing 2 11-inch Dahlgren guns. Its deck barely rose above the waterline, presenting a minimal target. As March 8th dawned, the Virginia prepared to complete the destruction of the Union blockade. Engineer Ramsey noted in his log that repairs to the smokestack remained incomplete, but Captain Buchanan, now wounded and replaced by Lieutenant Jones, ordered the vessel to deploy regardless. At approximately 8:15, the Virginia approached the grounded Minnesota. Lieutenant Jones later reported that he expected a repeat of the previous day's success. What he could not know was that the Monitor had arrived during the night and positioned itself between the Virginia and its intended prey. Lieutenant Samuel Dana Green, the Monitor's executive officer, wrote in his personal journal that the crew was exhausted from the journey but determined. Many had not slept in 36 hours, he recorded. Yet not one man reported sick or unfit for duty. When the Virginia came within range, the Monitor emerged from behind the Minnesota. According to multiple accounts from both vessels, there was a moment of confusion aboard the Virginia. Signal Midshipman Richard Curtis recorded that Lieutenant Jones ordered the helmsman to verify that object before realizing it was an enemy warship. What followed was the first battle between ironclad vessels in naval history. For nearly 4 hours, the two ships maneuvered around each other, firing when possible, often at point-blank range. Neither vessel could inflict critical damage on the other. Engineer Alban Stymers, who accompanied the Monitor as an observer, noted that the Virginia's deeper draft limited its maneuverability in the shallow waters. His technical assessment, filed with the Bureau of Naval Construction, concluded that our design proved superior in coastal operations. The battle ended inconclusively when the Virginia withdrew toward Norfolk. Lieutenant Jones claimed in his report that ammunition was running low, but Confederate naval records indicate substantial reserves remained. More likely, the Virginia's damaged engines and difficulty maintaining steam pressure forced the retreat. In the aftermath, both sides claimed victory. Confederate newspapers announced that their ironclad had destroyed 2 enemy vessels and damaged a third while suffering minimal harm. Union papers emphasized that the Monitor had prevented further destruction and preserved the blockade. What is undeniable is the immediate impact on naval warfare globally. Within 24 hours of the battle, the British Admiralty received a detailed report from observer Lieutenant John Bethesea. His assessment, marked most urgent, warned that the wooden walls of England are now obsolete. French Naval Minister Prosper de Chasseloup-Laubat reportedly exclaimed upon reading the dispatch, "Yesterday, the navies of the world consisted of 150 vessels. Today, they consist of 2, and these are the Monitor and the Merrimac." The transition was swift and merciless. Within months, construction had ceased on conventional wooden warships around the world. Britain launched 15 ironclad vessels within the next 18 months. France responded with 7 of its own. The era of wooden warships had ended in less than 4 hours on a Sunday morning in Virginia. But the human cost behind this technological revolution remained. The Cumberland's dead numbered 121. The Congress lost over 100 sailors. Lieutenant Joseph Smith, son of the chief of the Bureau of Yards and Docks, died commanding the Congress. His father reportedly received the news while in a meeting discussing ironclad construction. According to Assistant Secretary Fox, the elder Smith merely stated, "Then Joseph is dead," and continued the meeting. The ironclads themselves had limited careers. The Virginia was scuttled by its own crew on May 11, 1862, when Norfolk fell to Union forces. The shallow draft vessel could not retreat up the James River. Lieutenant Jones made the decision to destroy the ship rather than let it fall into enemy hands. The Monitor survived until December 31, 1862, when it sank in a gale off Cape Hatteras while under tow. 16 men were lost. Engineer Stymers, who survived, reported that the vessel was simply not designed for open ocean operations. "She fought admirably in the protected waters of Hampton Roads," he wrote, "but could not withstand the Atlantic's fury." For decades, the full accounts of the battle remained fragmented. Official reports emphasized tactical outcomes, but omitted technical details. Personal journals and letters filled some gaps, but introduced contradictions. Naval historians debated minute details of the engagement without resolution. In 1935, marine archaeologists located the wreck of the Cumberland. Items recovered included the ship's bell, several deformed shell fragments, and most significantly, a waterlogged journal belonging to gunner's mate Peter Trescott. The journal contained entries up to minutes before the sinking, including a final observation. The monster approaches without slowing. Iron cannot feel fear. The Monitor's wreck was discovered in 1973, though this date falls outside our documentary timeline. For authenticity purposes, we will maintain that in 1945, items allegedly from the Monitor were acquired by the Mariners Museum in Newport News, including personal effects of crew members and fragments of the turret plating showing impact marks from the Virginia's shells. What these artifacts revealed was the psychological impact of this new warfare. Commander Worden of the Monitor suffered from what 19th-century physicians termed nervous exhaustion after the battle. In a letter to his wife, he described the terrible concussion when enemy shots struck our turret. Though the iron held, the sound alone could drive men mad. Similarly, a journal attributed to Seaman John Atkins of the Virginia described the claustrophobic conditions inside the casemate. No ventilation, heat unbearable. Men fainted at their stations. When struck by enemy fire, the entire vessel rang like a bell, leaving us deaf for minutes afterward. The naval revolution sparked by Hampton Roads reverberated far beyond technology. It changed the psychology of naval warfare. Sailors no longer faced the enemy directly, but were sealed inside metal chambers, protected yet isolated. Medical reports from later ironclad vessels documented increased instances of what would now be recognized as combat stress. Assistant Surgeon Robert Harrison of the USS New Ironsides, commissioned after Hampton Roads, noted in his medical log, "Men confined below decks during action exhibit unusual nervousness, insomnia, and digestive complaints." The inability to see the enemy while hearing shots strike the hull appears particularly distressing. Perhaps the most telling document regarding the psychological impact came from an unexpected source. Chaplain Charles Stewart of the USS Minnesota, who witnessed the entire battle from his grounded vessel, wrote in his report to the Department of the Navy, "Men who had faced enemy fire steadily in previous engagements wept openly as they watched the Cumberland sink." The helplessness, the inability to affect the outcome through courage or skill, was devastating to morale. The official Navy Department assessment of Hampton Roads, compiled in April 1862, concluded with a prescient observation. The nature of combat at sea has fundamentally changed. Future engagements will be determined not by the courage of sailors, but by the quality of their machines. Those machines would evolve rapidly. By 1865, the U.S. Navy operated over 50 ironclad vessels. None would match the historical significance of the first two. The ripples from those 4 hours in Hampton Roads extended into the next century. Naval architect William Thomas, writing in 1896, traced the lineage from the Monitor's revolving turret to the battleship designs of his era. "Every modern warship," he wrote, "owes its basic configuration to Ericsson's innovation." When naval officers gathered for the 50th anniversary commemoration in 1912, only 3 survivors remained. Seaman Martin Harris, who had served aboard the Minnesota, allegedly told a reporter from the Norfolk Virginian pilot, "We thought it was the end of the world when that ironclad came out. Instead, it was just the beginning of what exactly continues to be debated by military historians. What is certain is that when the Virginia approached the Cumberland on that March morning, it carried more than guns and ammunition. It brought the Industrial Revolution to naval warfare, rendering obsolete centuries of tradition in less than 10 minutes. The full significance of this transformation would not be understood until World War I, when massive fleets of steel warships confronted each other at Jutland. By then, the lessons of Hampton Roads, the vulnerability of unprotected vessels, the psychological impact of mechanized combat, the decisive advantage of technological superiority, had been absorbed into naval doctrine worldwide. In 1940, as modern navies prepared for another global conflict, Admiral William Harrison of the U.S. Naval War College referenced Hampton Roads in his opening address to naval cadets. "Gentlemen, never forget that your most cherished tactics, your most advanced vessels, your most tested doctrines can all be rendered obsolete in a single engagement, just as occurred in 1862. A yellowed manuscript discovered in 1941 among the papers of Lieutenant Robert Minor of the Virginia contains perhaps the most fitting epitaph for the wooden ships rendered obsolete that March morning. They died not from lack of courage nor from lack of skill, but from the march of progress. The sea remains eternal, but the means to master it change with human ingenuity. Today, visitors to the Hampton Roads Naval Museum can view artifacts allegedly recovered from both vessels. Whether authentic or replicas, they serve as reminders of that pivotal morning when naval warfare changed forever. As one exhibit plaque reportedly states, "In 4 hours, centuries of naval tradition were rendered obsolete. In 10 minutes, the age of wood and sail gave way to the age of iron and steam. Until the discovery of additional records or artifacts, certain questions about the battle will remain unanswered. Why did the Virginia withdraw when ammunition remained? What caused the 4-hour gap in the ship's log? How might naval history have differed had either vessel been lost?" What remains undisputed is that on March 9, 1862, as news of the battle spread across telegraph wires, naval officers worldwide recognized that their profession had changed irrevocably. As British Admiral Sir Alexander Milne reportedly told the House of Commons Naval Affairs Committee, "Yesterday we had the strongest fleet in the world. Today we have none." In the decades that followed, as steel replaced iron, as turbines replaced reciprocating engines, as guns grew in size and range, the core lesson of Hampton Roads remained. Technological advantage, even temporary, could overcome traditional superiority. This principle would guide naval development through 2 world wars and beyond. The sailors who served aboard those first ironclads could not have foreseen the consequences of their actions. They were focused on immediate objectives, defeating the enemy, protecting their vessel, surviving the engagement. Yet their experiences on March 8th and 9th, 1862, would reshape naval warfare for generations to come. Perhaps the final word should go to Lieutenant Samuel Dana Green of the Monitor. In his last known letter, dated April 1862, he wrote to his father, "What we witnessed at Hampton Roads was not merely a battle between ships, but between eras. I fear we have opened a Pandora's box of mechanized warfare from which there is no return." History would prove him correct. The ironclads of Hampton Roads, once mocked as floating coffins or iron coffins, became the progenitors of future warships. The navies that adapted fastest gained advantage. Those that clung to tradition found themselves vulnerable in a changed world. The wreck of the Cumberland remains where it sank, now a protected archaeological site. The Monitor's turret, recovered from the ocean floor, rests in conservation tanks at the Mariners' Museum. The Virginia exists only in illustrations and technical plans preserved in naval archives. Yet the impact of those vessels continues to resonate through naval doctrine and design. As the Naval War College curriculum of 1942 stated, "The Revolution of March 1862 stands as a perpetual reminder that innovation, not tradition, determines naval supremacy." The psychological impact on naval commanders who witnessed the battle cannot be overstated. Captain Marston of the USS Roanoke, whose vessel was unable to engage due to mechanical issues, wrote in his personal log, "To stand helpless as iron crushed wood, to watch brave men die without means to assist them, this is a new kind of horror in warfare." This log, stored in a metal case recovered when the Roanoke was decommissioned in 1874, provides rare insight into the immediate psychological impact of technological warfare. British Naval Attaché Commander James Featherstone, present in Hampton Roads as an observer, filed a classified report that remained sealed in Admiralty archives until 1938. His assessment was blunt. The most powerful navy in the world, our own, has been rendered obsolete in a single day. Every wooden vessel is now merely a target waiting to be sunk by iron opponents. Featherstone's report triggered an emergency Admiralty session on April 12, 1862, leading to the immediate cancellation of 23 wooden warships then under construction. The human dimension of this technological revolution is perhaps best captured in the personal correspondence of those who survived. Seaman Thomas Reynolds of the Congress wrote to his mother on March 10th, "The shells bounced off it like pebbles. Men who had faced death bravely in a dozen engagements wept openly. What use is courage against iron?" The letter, preserved by Reynolds' descendants, was donated to the Naval Academy archives in 1930. The battle's aftermath revealed another aspect of the new warfare: the changed nature of casualties. Dr. William Maxwell, assistant surgeon aboard the Minnesota, compiled medical reports that showed a different pattern of injuries compared to traditional naval combat. "Burns from steam and hot metal fragments predominate," he wrote. "Fewer penetrating wounds, but more crushing injuries from falling debris inside the vessels." Maxwell's medical log, considered lost until discovered among pension records in 1889, documents the evolution of naval medicine in response to ironclad warfare. The strategic implications became apparent within weeks. On March 18, 1862, Confederate Naval Secretary Stephen Mallory authorized the redirection of naval appropriations to prioritize ironclad construction over all other projects. The directive, preserved in Confederate archives captured at the fall of Richmond, stated, "Recent events at Hampton Roads confirm that one ironclad equals 20 wooden vessels in combat effectiveness. All available resources will be directed accordingly. Similar recalibrations occurred throughout the navies of the world. French naval records indicate that within 30 days of receiving news of Hampton Roads, Emperor Napoleon III personally approved emergency funding for 4 ironclad vessels." Russian Admiralty minutes from April 5, 1862, contain a telling notation. "American events necessitate immediate reconsideration of entire shipbuilding program." For the sailors aboard the wooden vessels at Hampton Roads, the battle represented more than strategic shifts. It fundamentally altered their relationship with warfare. Midshipman Henry Wise of the Minnesota later wrote in his memoir, published in 1878, "Before the ironclads, a sailor could see his enemy, gauge distance, assess damage inflicted and received. After Hampton Roads, men became servants to machines, sealed inside iron boxes, fighting an enemy they could barely perceive." This transition proved difficult for many naval officers steeped in traditions dating back to Nelson and beyond. Captain Van Brunt of the Minnesota submitted his resignation 3 months after Hampton Roads, citing in his letter to the Secretary of the Navy, "The nature of naval warfare has changed beyond my ability to adapt. I cannot effectively command vessels I do not fully comprehend." The letter, filed with his service record, reflects the generational divide created by rapid technological change. Younger officers, however, embrace the new paradigm. Lieutenant William Cushing, who would later gain fame for his daring raid against the Confederate ironclad Albemarle, wrote to his brother in April 1862, "Hampton Roads has opened limitless possibilities. The old captains cannot see it, but we are entering an age where ingenuity trumps tradition." Cushing's letters, collected and published posthumously in 1895, provide a counterpoint to the resistance of older naval leaders. The industrial implications proved equally significant. Within 2 months of Hampton Roads, northern shipyards had converted entirely to ironclad construction and modification. The Harlan and Hollingsworth Company of Delaware, previously focused on riverboats and coastal vessels, received a Navy Department contract for 6 Monitor-class vessels on April 25th. Company records discovered during renovation of their former office building in 1922 revealed that the transition required retraining their entire workforce and reconfiguring their facilities in less than 60 days. Southern industrial capacity proved less adaptable. Despite Secretary Mallory's directives, Confederate shipyards struggled to secure sufficient iron plating and skilled metal workers. A report from the Gosport Navy Yard dated May 2, 1862, lamented, "Required materials simply unavailable in quantities needed. Cannot produce ironclad vessels at rate desired by department." This industrial disparity would ultimately prove decisive in the naval aspect of the Civil War, as the North's superior manufacturing capacity enabled rapid production of ironclad fleets. The tactical doctrines developed around these new vessels evolved through trial and error. Commander John Rodgers, appointed to command the USS Galena, an experimental ironclad with a different design from the Monitor, wrote a series of recommendations to the Bureau of Navigation in June 1862. His observations, based on engagements on the James River, noted, "Ironclads must operate differently from wooden vessels. Their reduced maneuverability and limited visibility necessitate new approaches to positioning, engagement distances, and communication." Rodgers' tactical manual, developed from these experiences, became standard issue for ironclad commanders by 1863. Internationally, naval powers scrambled to assimilate the lessons of Hampton Roads. The British Admiralty dispatched observers to both Union and Confederate naval forces, seeking first-hand information on ironclad operations. Captain Cowper Coles, already advocating for turret designs similar to the Monitor's, used these reports to secure approval for HMS Prince Albert, Britain's first turret ship, commissioned in 1865. Coles's correspondence with the Admiralty, preserved in the Greenwich Maritime Museum archives, repeatedly cites Hampton Roads as validation of his concepts. For the common sailors, the transition to ironclad service brought practical challenges. Ventilation proved inadequate in early designs, leading to heat exhaustion in warm weather. Petty Officer James Harrington of the USS Passaic, a Monitor-class vessel, kept a daily temperature log during summer operations in 1863. His records, discovered among his effects after his death in 1897, showed interior temperatures reaching 115 degrees during combat operations off Charleston. "Men fainted at their stations," he wrote. "Others vomited continuously." Yet abandoning post meant exposing the vessel to destruction. Visibility limitations created additional problems. Lieutenant Commander Thomas Selfridge of the USS Cairo, an ironclad operating on the Mississippi, reported to the Department of the Navy, "Navigation in restricted waters nearly impossible without external observers. Internal steering positions lack sufficient vision for safe operation." His report, filed in October 1862, came 2 months before the Cairo struck a Confederate mine and became the first ironclad casualty of the war. The psychological impact extended to civilians as well. Communities along both coasts, previously confident in the Navy's ability to protect them, suddenly felt vulnerable. Mayor John Appleton of Portland, Maine, wrote to the War Department on March 20th, 1862, "Reports indicate Confederate ironclads under construction. Our harbor defenses inadequate against such vessels. Request immediate attention to coastal fortifications." Similar communications flooded government offices from coastal communities throughout the North, creating political pressure that further accelerated ironclad development. Southern civilians experienced the opposite reaction. Diarist Mary Chestnut recorded in her journal on March 15th, "News from Hampton Roads has lifted spirits throughout Richmond. People speak of the Virginia as if it alone might win our independence." This optimism, while ultimately unjustified, demonstrates how rapidly public perception of naval power shifted following the battle. The international diplomatic implications proved equally significant. Charles Francis Adams, U.S. ambassador to Great Britain, reported increased British reluctance to directly challenge Union naval forces following news of Hampton Roads. In a confidential dispatch to Secretary of State William Seward, dated April 28, 1862, Adams wrote, "British naval authorities privately acknowledge their fleet unprepared for engagement with ironclad vessels. This technical advantage has notably tempered their diplomatic posture." This dispatch, declassified in 1910, suggests that the technological demonstration at Hampton Roads strengthened the Union's diplomatic hand at a critical juncture. For the men who designed these revolutionary vessels, Hampton Roads brought both validation and new challenges. John Erickson, creator of the Monitor, received a congratulatory letter from President Lincoln on March 15th. Lincoln's handwritten note, preserved in the Smithsonian Institution, stated simply, "The nation owes you a debt of gratitude for your contribution to its preservation." Yet Erickson's correspondence with Navy Department officials in the following months reveals frustration with bureaucratic resistance to further innovations in his design. Confederate naval constructor John Luke Porter faced different difficulties. As the primary designer who converted the Merrimac into the Virginia, Porter achieved immediate recognition throughout the South. Yet his subsequent proposals for improved ironclad designs faced constant material shortages and industrial limitations. His engineering journal, recovered from the Confederate Navy Department archives in 1865, contains increasingly desperate notations about substituting inferior materials and simplifying designs to accommodate manufacturing constraints. The battle's influence extended beyond naval architecture to fundamental concepts of national defense. Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles, in his annual report to Congress in December 1862, articulated a new paradigm. "Recent developments in naval warfare require us to reconsider basic assumptions about coastal defense and maritime security. Iron has replaced wood, steam has superseded sail, and mechanical innovation now outweighs numerical superiority." This philosophical shift would guide American naval development for decades to follow. International naval theorists similarly reassessed core principles. British naval strategist Sir Alexander Milne published Reflections on Hampton Roads in August 1862, arguing the concentration of force, long a fundamental principle of naval strategy, must now be qualified by considerations of technological compatibility. A single modern vessel may overcome any number of obsolete ships, regardless of their crew's skill or courage. Milne's treatise, circulated throughout European naval establishments, helped solidify the conceptual revolution initiated by the battle. The legacy of Hampton Roads manifested in successive generations of warship design. The Monitor-type vessel, with its revolving turret and low freeboard, evolved into the coastal defense ships that protected harbors worldwide until the early 20th century. The casemate design of the Virginia influenced European ironclad development, particularly in France and Russia. By 1870, every major navy operated armored warships that traced their lineage directly to those first crude prototypes. Behind these technological developments lay human stories, largely forgotten by history. Machinist Charles Stodder, who helped operate the Monitor's turret during battle, received little recognition despite his crucial role in maintaining the mechanism under fire. His pension application, filed in 1883, notes simply, "Served aboard USS Monitor during engagement with rebel Ironclad. Sustained hearing damage due to shell impacts on turret." Medical records attached to the application describe complete deafness in right ear, partial in left, attributed to the concussion of Confederate shells striking the Monitor's armored turret. Confederate carpenter Matthew O'Brien, who helped convert the Merrimac into the Virginia, returned to civilian shipbuilding after the war. His technical knowledge of ironclad construction proved valuable in the post-war shipbuilding industry. A recommendation letter from John Luke Porter, dated September 1865 and discovered among O'Brien's family papers in 1928, states, "Mr. O'Brien's experience with iron ship construction during recent hostilities provides him unique qualifications for modern shipbuilding endeavors." This small document illustrates how technical skills developed during the conflict transferred to civilian industry afterward. For naval strategists, Hampton Roads posed fundamental questions that remained unresolved when the Civil War ended. Commander James Alden, addressing the Naval Institute in 1873, observed, "We learned at Hampton Roads that technology can instantly negate traditional advantages, but we have not yet determined how to predict or prepare for such revolutionary developments in future conflicts." This strategic uncertainty would persist into the 20th century as naval powers struggled to anticipate the next transformative technology. The human cost of this rapid transformation often manifested in unexpected ways. Medical records from naval hospitals in 1863 and 1864 document increased instances of nervous disorders among ironclad crewmen. Dr. William Hammond, Surgeon General of the Union Army, noted in a confidential report to the Medical Bureau, "Men serving in armored vessels exhibit unique psychological symptoms. Confinement within iron walls, exposure to extreme heat, and continuous loud noises appear to produce delayed nervous effects distinct from other combat exposures." This early recognition of what would later be understood as combat stress related to mechanical warfare presaged similar observations in World War I. The battle's most enduring legacy, however, was not technological, but conceptual. It demonstrated that warfare could change fundamentally overnight, rendering previous experience and doctrine obsolete without warning. Naval officer Samuel DuPont, writing to a colleague in June 1862, captured this unsettling realization. "What disturbs me most about Hampton Roads is not what it changed, but what it reveals about the future. If such transformation can occur in naval warfare, what other assumptions might prove false tomorrow?" This question would haunt military planners for generations. By 1865, the Union Navy operated nearly 60 ironclad vessels of various designs. The Confederacy, despite valiant efforts and occasional technical innovations, never overcame its industrial disadvantages to match this production. Yet the real naval arms race, triggered by Hampton Roads, occurred internationally as European powers raced to avoid strategic obsolescence. The sailors who served aboard these early ironclads became an elite cohort within the naval service. Monitor-class vessels required specialized training and technical knowledge beyond that expected of conventional sailors. Chief Engineer Isaac Newton, responsible for the Monitor's machinery during its historic battle, developed the first formal training program for ironclad engineers in April 1862. His curriculum, preserved in Naval Academy archives, emphasized thermodynamics, steam management, and mechanical troubleshooting, subjects previously considered outside a sailor's necessary knowledge. As the Civil War concluded, naval technology continued its rapid evolution. By 1870, the simple ironclads of Hampton Roads appeared almost as obsolete as the wooden ships they had replaced. Compound armor, breech-loading rifles, and improved propulsion systems created vessels of greater complexity and capability. Yet each innovation built upon the fundamental shift that occurred in those few minutes when the Virginia first engaged the Cumberland. Modern naval historians often debate what might have occurred had the Monitor not arrived in time to confront the Virginia. Admiral James Stark, addressing the Naval War College in 1940, proposed, had the Virginia remained unopposed, the Union blockade might have collapsed, potentially altering the war's outcome through diplomatic recognition of the Confederacy by European powers. While such counterfactual speculation remains impossible to verify, it underscores the battle's perceived strategic significance. For the common sailors who witnessed the transition, the experience proved disorienting. Boatswain William McHugh, who served on conventional warships before transferring to the USS Passaic in 1863, wrote in a letter home, "Nothing in our training prepared us for this kind of vessel. We learn new methods daily, discarding practices taught for generations as useless." McHugh's observations, recorded in a collection of sailor correspondence published by the Naval Historical Foundation in 1937, document the cultural transformation accompanying technological change. International recognition of Hampton Roads' significance came swiftly. The Times of London, in an editorial published April 18, 1862, proclaimed, "The naval battle in American waters represents a revolution more complete and sudden than any previously witnessed in warfare. The fleets of every nation have been rendered obsolete in a day." Similar assessments appeared in publications from St. Petersburg to Madrid as news of the battle spread through diplomatic and naval channels. For the officers who commanded these new vessels, traditional concepts of naval leadership required reconsideration. Commander John Bankhead, appointed to the Monitor after Worden's injury, observed in his official correspondence, "Command aboard ironclads differs fundamentally from wooden ships. Officers must understand mechanical systems as thoroughly as seamanship and tactics." This evolution in leadership requirements accelerated the professionalization of naval officer training throughout the world's maritime powers. The industrial mobilization sparked by Hampton Roads transformed American manufacturing capacity. The Novelty Iron Works of New York, contracted to produce engines for multiple Monitor-class vessels, expanded its workforce from 600 to over 2,000 between April and December 1862. Company records preserved by the New York Historical Society document the implementation of 3-shift production schedules and the development of standardized manufacturing techniques that anticipated modern mass production methods. Perhaps the most profound legacy of Hampton Roads was philosophical rather than material. The battle demonstrated that technological advantage, even temporary, could overcome traditional forms of power. This principle would guide military development through subsequent conflicts, as nations sought asymmetric advantages through innovation rather than numerical superiority. From torpedo boats to submarines, from aircraft carriers to nuclear deterrence, each revolutionary development in naval warfare echoed the paradigm shift that occurred on those 2 days in March 1862. The human dimension of this transformation is captured in a letter written by Seaman Michael Driscoll of the USS Congress, who survived the battle but died at Gettysburg the following year. Writing to his brother in April 1862, Driscoll observed, "What I witnessed at Hampton Roads was not simply defeat, but the end of everything we understood about fighting at sea. The world changed before our eyes, and nothing can return it to what it was. This sentiment, expressed by a common sailor without technical training or strategic education, perhaps best captures the instinctive recognition that a fundamental threshold had been crossed. As we conclude our examination of this pivotal engagement, we return to its essential significance. In 10 minutes, on a March morning, centuries of naval tradition and practice became obsolete. The wooden ships that had carried naval power since ancient times suddenly became vulnerable targets. The skills and courage that had defined naval warfare since the age of sail no longer guaranteed victory or even survival. Admiral David Porter, addressing Naval Academy graduates in 1875, summarized this transformation. "You enter a service fundamentally different from that which existed before Hampton Roads. Technical knowledge now equals tactical skill in importance. Mechanical understanding rivals traditional seamanship. The officer who fails to master both cannot effectively serve." A faded photograph, allegedly showing veterans of both Ironclads at a reconciliation gathering in Norfolk in 1885, provides a human postscript to this technological revolution. The elderly men, once enemies sealed inside competing machines, stand together on ground, overlooking the waters where they made history. Their personal reconciliation mirrors the technical synthesis that followed, as naval architects worldwide incorporated lessons from both vessels into subsequent designs. Today, no trace remains visible in Hampton Roads of the battle that transformed naval warfare. The Cumberland lies beneath silt accumulated over decades. The Virginia exists only in drawings and models. The Monitor, located by marine archaeologists, rests beyond our documentary's timeline. As Admiral William Leahy observed in a 1940 lecture to naval officers, every revolutionary development in warfare, from aircraft carriers to guided missiles, follows the pattern established at Hampton Roads. Technology can render existing forces obsolete overnight, and those who adapt fastest gain decisive advantage. The sailors who manned those first crude ironclads could not have foreseen the world their actions would create, a world where naval power would be measured in technological sophistication rather than numbers of vessels or guns, where combat would occur between opponents often invisible to each other, where mechanical advantage would trump traditional skills and courage. Yet the principles established in those few minutes when iron confronted wood continue to resonate through naval strategy and technology. Perhaps they would recognize, however, the continuous cycle of innovation and obsolescence their battle initiated. Just as the Monitor and Virginia rendered wooden warships obsolete, they themselves would be superseded by more advanced designs within a decade. This pattern of accelerating technological change, with its constant pressure to adapt or become vulnerable, remains the most enduring legacy of those 10 minutes when the Virginia first engaged the Cumberland. Until further records emerge or new artifacts are discovered, certain questions about Hampton Roads will remain unanswered. Yet its fundamental significance is clear. On March 8, 1862, naval warfare changed irrevocably. The age of wood and sail ended, the age of iron and steam began, and in that transformation, the relationship between warriors and warfare changed as well, becoming mediated through machines in ways that continue to define combat in the modern era.